Welcome to Mastering Your Financial Life, hosted by Judy Heft, the founder and CEO of Judy Heft and Associates, Financial and Lifestyle Concierge. This year, she's celebrating 27 years in business. In every episode, Judy interviews professionals who help others successfully manage their financial lives. You can find this show on YouTube, LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and more. Judy is the author of 2 books, How to Be Smart, Successful, and Organized with Your Money for a Better Today and Tomorrow, and her latest book, Mastering Your Financial Life Cycles, How to Successfully Manage Money in Every Decade of Life. You can read chapters of her books and catch prior episodes of the show at www.judithheft.com. Now, here's the host of Mastering Your Financial Life, Judy Heft.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to episode 78 of Mastering Your Financial Life. I'm Judy Heft, Financial and Lifestyle Concierge, and celebrating, it's 28 years in business now, even though the commercial only says 27. And today I'm really excited to be here with Lesley Brovner and Mark Peters. Lesley and Mark are partners in a boutique law firm, which they started about 20 years ago after working together in the public sector. And they really are advocates for victims of fraud, ethics violations, any kind of compensation that happens in business. They handle investigation. They also work with people that have been victims of sexual abuse. So they really cover the gamut. And I think their passion really comes through. And this was a match made in heaven that they got together 20 years ago, and they have this wonderful, successful business. So they're passionate about seeking justice for victims. So I'm really thrilled. So welcome, Lesley and Mark. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Judy.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
It's my pleasure. So, I think there's a mystique around investigations and not wanting to cause any problems. So what are some of the internal investigations? When do they make sense for different companies? And you work with a lot of nonprofits too, I think. So when does it make sense?
Sure. So it makes sense in a number of different contexts. The most important is if your company or your not-for-profit is already the subject of a criminal or civil investigation, a civil investigation by regulatory authorities, then you want to do an internal investigation quickly to find out if there's anything wrong, and if so, what's wrong, before the regulators or the criminal authorities figure it out for themselves. Similarly, if you think you could be facing some kind of public scandal or public relations problem, you want to do an internal investigation quickly to find out, is there anything really wrong? And if so, try to fix it before things become too public. Also, if you happen to be in a highly regulated industry, then it often makes sense, if others in your industry are being investigated, you may want to do an internal investigation to make sure there are no problems in your shop before the regulators come knocking at your door. And finally, a lot of businesses want to do internal investigations just to make sure that they're in compliance both with city, state, and federal regulations and with their own guidelines and regulations.
So when you say regulations, what do you mean by regulations? What kind of regulations?
Well, there are lots of industries are highly regulated, and then everybody is regulated on certain general things. For example, in New York City and New York State, if you have a business with one employee or more, you have to do sexual harassment, anti-sexual harassment training every year. And you have to have certain things in your employee handbook. That's a regulation that affects everybody. But then, for example, if you're running a preschool or a special education school, we've represented people who do both of that, there are all sorts of regulations that govern the way you handle that, and you need to be in compliance with those regulations. And if the regulators come calling, you need to be prepared to talk to them.
Well, that's interesting, because I think, as a small business owner, with growth, you don't understand these things necessarily. You started out by yourself, you might have 1 or 2 employees, and all of a sudden that you've grown to a dozen employees and you don't even know that you're supposed to do these things. So it's really important to have somebody like you to reach out to ask these questions, so we know what we need to do to prevent any fraud or anything, any non-compliance issues coming up.
And that's actually where we see some of the worst compliance issues is in industries, in companies that have grown quickly, and their infrastructure, especially their compliance infrastructure, just hasn't kept up.
Yeah, I'm sure you see a lot of that. So what are some of the financial benefits of keeping up to date with the compliance requirements? Because there are many, and how do we even know what they are?
Great question. So there are 3 main ways in which you could be financially harmed from being out of compliance. The first is that there are fines built into a lot of these rules and regulations. So the government can impose fines if you're not in compliance. The second is that if somebody is injured, and you could be liable, you could be civilly liable if the injury is tied to lack of compliance in your company. Because remember, many of the compliance rules and regulations are based on keeping people safe and whole, whether it's regulations in the construction industry or in daycares or in the financial industry. So if you're out of compliance and there is harm that occurs because of that, then you could be financially liable. And then third, compliance failures often lead to reputational harm, and that can lead to a lack of investors, a loss of investors and revenue. And that's very, very hard for businesses to come back from. So it's important to stay in compliance for all of those reasons.
So how does a small business such as myself know what I need to be in compliance with? How do I find out what these laws are? Because I'm not a lawyer and they're not things I would normally think about.
And that's one reason that it is important to have a lawyer who's checking in on that. It is important to be in contact with a lawyer who can tell you, what are the rules and regulations governing your industry, and then help you get and stay in compliance.
Yeah, it's so important to have the right people to ask those questions of. So, what are some common pitfalls? What are some of the misconceptions?
Sure. So there are a number of common pitfalls. The five that are the most common and that occur the most are privacy and data security and breaches of privacy and data security, corrupt and illegal activity at the company, workplace health and safety violations, environmental impact issues, and then process risks.
So can you elaborate on some of those things and explain what they are?
Sure.
Maybe process risks.
Yeah, let's talk about process risks, and then we can talk about some of the misconceptions, which I think are important too. Process risks refer to the day-to-day way you run your business, and are you in compliance with your own rules and regulations? And they can include things like reporting failures, accounting errors, inadequate quality assurance. Those are all process risks.
Oh, so that's interesting. So yeah, these are things that I have no idea what they are, and now I'm supposed to go about finding out about them. So this is great. We don't know what we don't know.
Exactly. Exactly. That's a big problem. And the other problem is there's a lot of misconceptions about compliance. One of them is if you're a good person, if you're doing good work, and if you're following sort of common sense best practices, then you're going to be okay. And that's not always true. There are many really specific rules and regulations that you need to be in compliance with. So we've had people say to us, well, I really care about sexual harassment. Well, that's great. But if you're not doing the mandated training, you're not in compliance.
And so what do? You hire someone to come in and train your people?
You have to not just train, but there are levels of compliance, right? So you need to make sure you know the rules and regulations that governing your industry. You need to make sure that you have processes in place to be in compliance with those rules and regulations, that you are training on those rules and regulations, that there are consequences if there are violations, or consequences and remedial actions if someone violates the rules and regulations, and that you are keeping up to date with them.
So are the same rules in place for instance, a profit and a non-for-profit business? Does that
If
go
it's in the
across the board?
same industry, yes, there are not exceptions. Sometimes we get this question from nonprofits. Oh, but we're doing really good work. That's great. But if you are on the board of a nonprofit, that's not just an honorary title. You need to actually do things. You need to actually make sure that you're in compliance with all the rules and regulations.
Right. And in fact, the Attorney General who regulates not-for-profits, the New York State Attorney General, has issued guidance saying these are not just honorific positions. You really have obligations to keep your not-for-profit in compliance with various rules and laws.
So if we want to just figure this out, maybe we don't know an attorney to talk to, or, we don't have somebody in our back pocket. What can we do? Can we just go online and Google this information? Will we find it?
Some of it you'll find online. If you're a nonprofit, I think the AG's office is a good place to start. They do have guidance online, and they are very helpful, and they are, to the extent that they have the capacity, willing to answer questions. But we would caution that if at all possible, it is better to have an attorney, because some of the things that regulatory attorneys do, in addition to finding the rules, getting you into compliance, is making sure that they're the ones interacting with the government if things go wrong. And you really do need someone to do that.
Oh, Lesley, absolutely. No, I wasn't. You definitely need to have professionals on all levels helping you, because we don't, all the ins and outs, where to begin. But I was just thinking, like, in the beginning, when you're just trying to figure this out, before you call that attorney, like, what do I need to do? How do I figure this out? Because, like I said before, we don't know what we don't know. And for someone like myself that just started their business on her own and just grew it organically and didn't know that I had to do all these things, sexual harassment training, which is fairly new, I think. And some of the other things that, maybe just racial discrimination is, that might be something that we need to be trained on. It's interesting to know that this is all out there for us, and the right people are there to answer those questions. So that's great. Mm-hmm. So let's take a little break now, and then we're going to come back and talk some more. We're here with Lesley Brovner and Mark Peters.
Hey there. I just want to tell you a little bit about my new book that just came out called Mastering Your Financial Life Cycles. And here it is. It's how to successfully manage your money in every decade of life. I co-authored this with my CFO, Liz Levy. And together we created this manual that's going to help you through every stage of life. We talk about having a baby. We talk about young adulthood, pre-retirement, what to do when you're at that age of retirement. If you're contemplating divorce, do you need an estate plan? We cover all of these, each subject in a different chapter. And I really think that you're going to find this so helpful, because at the end of every chapter, we have checklists that you can look at and you can use, and they can be a guide for you. So this is a wonderful manual that we've created. It's available on Amazon. You can also find it on our website at judithheft.com/book. And we're here for you. If you need anything, reach out. I hope you enjoy the book. Here's another picture of it, just so you know what's going on. Here it is. And I'm really proud of it. It's my second book, and I'd love to have you read it and give me your feedback. Judy Heft, judithheft.com, financial and lifestyle concierge, celebrating 26 years in business. And over the years, I've learned so much. And what I've been trying to do is impart a little bit of this knowledge to you, so I can help all of you become as financially organized as I am.
And we're back here. We're back here with Lesley Brovner and Mark Peters. So I have a couple of questions. So you call yourself regulatory attorneys. What does that really mean? And how do I know if I need one?
Well, that's a great question. And there are several times when you need a regulatory attorney. And a regulatory attorney is someone who deals with regulated industries, who deals with government regulators. Lesley and I spent about 20 years in government, both at the Attorney General's office and at the New York City Inspector General's office. So we're familiar with a lot of these regulators, and regulatory attorneys are people who understand, the various regulations. There are a couple times when you would need one. One is you might need to do an internal investigation to determine whether you're in compliance with all of your city, state, and federal obligations. You might want to hire a regulatory attorney, as you referenced before, just to make sure that you're aware of what all of your obligations are. And then lastly, and this is the most important, If you're under investigation, you absolutely need a regulatory attorney who knows how to talk to the government, who can either talk the government down if you really haven't done anything wrong, or if there's a problem, can persuade the government that the penalty should be just and equitable.
So are there different types of regulatory attorneys?
Sure. For example, if you get a notice from the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, you really want to hire a regulatory attorney who comes out of the SEC and knows how to talk to them. By contrast, if you get a notification from the New York State Attorney General or from one of the city's regulatory agencies, you want someone who's come out of city and state government, as we have, who knows how to talk to those folks, because it's a different process.
So I know that I was reading that you work with sexual assault victims. So who are your clients? Are you representing the victim? Or are you representing the company? Or do you work on both sides? How does that all work?
We do work on both sides in the sense that we represent the victims of sexual assault as against large institutions like private schools, public schools, hospitals. But we also are regulatory attorneys, so we will come in and do an investigation if, for example, an entity wants to hire us. We had this happen recently where one person in that entity was accused of committing sexual harassment. We aren't defending that, but we are going in for the company to figure out what happened and how they can make things better and make it less likely to occur in the future.
Mm-hmm. And that's all part of education and training, I would assume.
That's certainly a big part of it.
For preventing that to happen again and in the future. Certainly
a big part of it. Yeah.
And so, what are some of the things, what's one thing that you wish every profit or not-for-profit knew?
It's hard to get it down to just one thing. So I guess we'll give you our top three.
Okay.
One is that regulatory compliance is required regardless of size. And as you already said, regardless of nonprofit or for-profit status. Two is that regulatory law is constantly evolving. So just because you were in compliance last year or the year before does not mean that you are still in compliance. You need to keep up to date on the changes in the rules and regulations. And three is that problems with regulators don't go away. They will get worse. You can't simply ignore them. We have actually had people call us and say, I was supposed to show up at a hearing to deal with this and I didn't show up. Okay, those regulators are not going away. You need to address these issues.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I know. Well, yeah, we don't want to not show up when the court is calling us. That's definitely a no-no.
It's not a good plan. That's not a good plan.
It's so funny that you said that. It's a different related topic, but when I was getting divorced, I was supposed to show up in court one day, but I didn't know about it and I wasn't there. And it didn't really hurt me too much, but it wasn't a good show for me. It didn't make me look like I really cared. I didn't have the date in my calendar for some reason. I don't remember. It was 20 years ago, but I remember not showing up that day and them calling me, where are you? I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm nowhere near here. I can't get in there. But it's important to show up.
Yeah, it's important to show up. It's important to show up prepared.
Absolutely. Yes, definitely. So is there anything else that we didn't cover that we want to tell our listeners?
The one other thing I would say is when a regulator, if you are being looked at, they can look at many different things. So if a regulator is looking at you for financial impropriety, that doesn't mean that's the only thing they're going to look at. So just be aware that once they're looking, you should always be in compliance with all of the rules and regulations, but especially if you are already on the government's radar.
Yeah, because I guess you're opening up a can of worms. Is it similar to an audit? Once you're audited, you are vulnerable to have another audit the following year?
It is very similar to that. Yes.
So you can't be too careful, I guess.
Exactly.
I need to pay attention. Well, this was really interesting. Thank you so much, Lesley and Mark, for being a great guest. I really enjoyed talking to you. I know I learned a lot. I'm sure our listeners did too. How can they find you?
They can reach us at the name of the law firm is Peters Brovner. We're on the web under petersbrovner.com. They can reach us at our email addresses, which is mpeters@petersbrovner.com and lbrovner@petersbrovner.com. And that's the best way to reach us.
And I'm sure they can find you on LinkedIn.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
That's always a good way to find people, I find. Well, this was great. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed our conversation. I'm looking forward to hearing more about it at another time.
Thanks, Judy.
Thanks.
Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having us on.
Thank you for tuning into Mastering Your Financial Life, hosted by Judy Heft. You can read chapters of her books and catch prior episodes of the show at www.judithheft.com. Thank you for your positive comments and sharing this show with others.